Okay, so let's talk about one of the most beloved animated films ever made, Mulan, released by Disney in 1998. If you haven't seen it, first of all, where have you been? And second of all, stick around because we're going to break down everything about this movie, the story, the characters, the production, the music, the animation, and so much more. Whether you're a longtime fan or someone who's just curious about what made this film so special, you're in the right place. Grab some snacks, get comfortable, and let's dive in. So the basic premise of Mulan is actually rooted in an ancient Chinese legend called the Ballad of Hua Mulan, which dates back over 1,000 years. The story follows a young Chinese woman named Fa Mulan, who, when her aging and injured father is called to serve in the imperial army to fight against the Hun invasion, decides to disguise herself as a man and take his place. Now, in ancient China, women were not allowed to serve in the military. That was strictly a man's world. So Mulan literally has to pretend to be her father's son in order to enlist. She cuts her hair, steals her father's armor and conscription notice, and sneaks off into the night. The stakes couldn't be higher. If she's discovered, she faces serious consequences. But she's driven by love for her father and a deep desire to prove herself, not just to her family, but to herself. That's the heart of the story, and it's something that resonates with audiences of all ages even today, more than 2 decades after the film's release. Now let's talk about the main characters, because Mulan has one of the most memorable ensemble casts in Disney history. At the center of it all is Fa Mulan herself, voiced by Ming-Na Wen, who absolutely brings this character to life with warmth, humor, and genuine emotional depth. Mulan is different from the classic Disney princesses who came before her. She's not waiting around to be saved. She's the one doing the saving. She's clumsy at times. She doubts herself. She makes mistakes. But she keeps going, and that's what makes her so compelling. Then there's Captain Li Shang, voiced by B.D. Wong, who serves as Mulan's commanding officer and eventual love interest. Shang is tough, disciplined, and incredibly capable. But he's also a young man dealing with enormous pressure. He's been given command of a ragtag group of recruits, and he's determined to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. The dynamic between Mulan and Shang is one of the most interesting relationships in the entire Disney canon, mostly because Shang falls in love with Ping, the male persona Mulan adopts, before he knows the truth. It's layered and a little complicated and honestly kind of ahead of its time. Speaking of characters, we absolutely have to talk about Mushu, the tiny red dragon voiced by Eddie Murphy, who is without a doubt one of the greatest comic relief characters in animation history. Mushu is a disgraced family guardian who sees Mulan's journey as his chance to restore his own honor. He's loud, he's ridiculous, he's incredibly full of himself despite being roughly the size of a lizard, and he's absolutely hilarious. Eddie Murphy brings an energy to this role that is completely unique. You can't imagine anyone else doing it. Mushu has so many iconic lines and moments that it's hard to pick just one favorite. But beyond the comedy, Mushu genuinely cares about Mulan, and that friendship gives the film a lot of its emotional warmth. He might be small, but his heart and his ego are enormous. Then there's the trio of soldiers who become Mulan's closest friends during training. Yao, voiced by Harvey Fierstein, who is stocky and aggressive and has a bit of a Napoleon complex. Ling, voiced by Geda Watanabe, who fancies himself a comedian and a ladies' man. And Chien Po, voiced by Jerry Tondo, who is the gentle giant of the group, calm, kind, and always trying to keep the peace. These 3 guys add so much comedic energy to the film, especially during the training sequences, but they also show real growth over the course of the story. By the end, they're not just comic relief, they're genuine heroes in their own right. And honestly, their friendship with Mulan, first as Ping, then knowing her true identity, is one of the most heartwarming parts of the whole movie. Now, one of the most important characters in the film, and one who doesn't always get the attention he deserves, is Fa Zhou, Mulan's father, voiced by Soon-Tek Oh. Fa Zhou is a retired war hero who walks with a limp due to injuries sustained in previous battles. When the Emperor's Chai arrives and calls for one man from each family to serve, Fa Zhou steps up without hesitation, even though everyone in the room can see he's in no condition to fight. He's proud and honorable to a fault, and the relationship between him and Mulan is the emotional core of the entire film. There's a scene early on where Mulan is looking at her father through a reflection in a pool of water, and the sorrow and love on her face tells you everything you need to know about why she makes the choice she does. It's not about glory. It's about protecting the man she loves most in the world. And then, of course, there's the villain, Shan Yu, voiced by Miguel Ferrer. Now, here's something interesting about Shan Yu. He's actually one of the more underutilized villains in the Disney pantheon, but that doesn't mean he's not effective. Shan Yu is menacing, physically imposing, and genuinely threatening in a way that feels real rather than theatrical. He doesn't monologue endlessly or sing about his evil plans. He just acts, and that makes him scary. When he smiles at the Great Wall before tearing through it with his army, you believe he's capable of anything. He's not a complex villain with a sympathetic backstory, but he doesn't need to be. He's a force of nature, and that works for this story. Let's also mention Grandmother Fa, Mulan's eccentric grandmother, who is voiced by June Foray. Grandmother Fa is absolutely delightful. She's the kind of elder who says exactly what she thinks, does whatever she wants, and gets away with it because she's old and everyone loves her. She sends Mulan to the matchmaker with a lucky cricket named Crikey, which becomes one of Mulan's companions throughout the film. And speaking of companions, there's Khan, Mulan's loyal horse, who is brave and clever in his own right, and Little Brother, the family dog, who is basically just there to be adorable and panic at the worst possible moments. Now let's shift gears and talk about who made this film, because the people behind the camera are just as fascinating as the story on screen. Mulan was directed by Tony Bancroft and Barry Cook, and this was actually a pretty significant film in terms of Disney's production history. The two directors brought different strengths to the project. Bancroft came from an animation background and had a strong sense of character and comedy, while Cook brought a more technical and visual sensibility. Together, they created something that feels cohesive and intentional, even though the production process, as we'll discuss, was anything but smooth. The screenplay was written by Rita Xiao, Chris Sanders, yes, the same Chris Sanders who would later create Lilo and Stitch, Philip Lazebnik, Raymond Singer, and Eugenia Bostwick Singer. That's a lot of writers, and it reflects the fact that the script went through many iterations before landing in its final form. The story development process at Disney during this era was notoriously collaborative, sometimes chaotically so, but in the case of Mulan, the result speaks for itself. The script balances humor, heart, action, and cultural authenticity in a way that feels remarkably well crafted, especially given how many cooks were in the proverbial kitchen. The film was produced under the Walt Disney Feature Animation banner, and it was actually the first Disney animated feature to be produced primarily at the Disney MGM Studios facility in Florida, rather than the main studio in Burbank, California. This was part of Disney's strategy at the time to expand its animation production capacity, and it gave the Florida team a chance to take the lead on a major theatrical release. The Florida studio had previously worked on segments of other films, but Mulan was their big moment, and they absolutely delivered. Now, let's talk about the story's origins in a bit more detail, because understanding where Mulan comes from makes the film even more interesting. The Ballad of Hua Mulan is a poem that originated in China around the 4th or 5th century, though some scholars place it as late as the 6th century during the Northern Wei dynasty. The poem itself is relatively short, only about 300 words in its original form, but the story it tells captured the imagination of Chinese people for over a millennium. Over the centuries, the tale was expanded, retold, adapted for theater, and eventually became one of the most recognized stories in Chinese culture. Mulan became a symbol of filial piety, the deep respect and love for one's parents, as well as female courage and capability. Disney's journey to bring this story to the screen began in the early 1990s, when development executive Robert D. Sanssouci, who also brought the Little Mermaid story to Disney's attention, pitched the idea of adapting the Hua Mulan legend. The studio was intrigued, and a small development team began working on the concept. Early versions of the story were quite different from what we see in the final film. At various points, the story was more comedic, more romantic, more action-focused, or more culturally grounded, depending on who was working on it at any given time. Finding the right tone took years of development. One of the most important decisions made during production was to send a team of Disney artists and story people to China for a research. This group, sometimes referred to as the China Trip Team, spent time in China studying the landscapes, architecture, art, culture, and history that would inform the film's visual style. They visited the Great Wall, explored temples and palaces, studied traditional Chinese painting and calligraphy, and absorbed as much as they could in a relatively short period of time. The trip was transformative for the production, and its influence is visible in virtually every frame of the finished film. The producers of Mulan were Pam Coates, who served as producer, and Kendra Holland, who was an associate producer. Coates was a crucial figure in shaping the film's tone and story, and she worked closely with the directors and the writing team throughout the lengthy development process. She was a strong advocate for keeping Mulan as a genuinely strong, active protagonist, rather than softening her into a more passive role, which was a real concern during development given Disney's history with more traditionally passive female leads. The fact that Mulan is as bold and capable as she is owes a great deal to the people who fought for her character at every stage of production. Now, the music. Oh, the music. We cannot talk about Mulan without spending some serious time on the soundtrack, because it is absolutely extraordinary. The songs were written by Matthew Wilder and David Zippel, and the score was composed by Jerry Goldsmith, a legendary Hollywood composer with dozens of acclaimed scores to his name. The combination of Wilder and Zippel's pop-influenced songwriting and Goldsmith's orchestral grandeur creates a musical landscape that feels both accessible and epic. Let's start with Reflection, which is Mulan's signature solo song and one of the most emotionally resonant songs in the entire Disney canon. The song plays after Mulan's disastrous visit to the matchmaker, a scene we'll get to in a moment, and it gives voice to everything Mulan is feeling: the sense of not fitting in, of not living up to expectations, of wanting something more, but not knowing what that something is. Christina Aguilera recorded the pop version that plays over the end credits, but the version sung by Lea Salonga, who also provided the singing voice for Jasmine in Aladdin, during the film itself is quietly devastating in the best possible way. It's a song that a lot of people, especially young people who feel like they don't quite belong, have connected with deeply over the years. Then there's I'll Make a Man Out of You, which might be the most energetic and enthusiastically beloved training montage song in film history. Sung by Donny Osmond, who provided Li Shang's singing voice, the song plays over a sequence showing Mulan and the other recruits undergoing brutal military training under Shang's demanding leadership. It starts with everyone being terrible at everything, and by the end, they're a competent fighting unit. The song is catchy, it's funny, it's motivating, and it has remained a genuine cultural phenomenon. If you've ever been in a gym and heard someone humming it under their breath, you understand. The song was actually included on lists of the greatest animated film songs decades after the film's release, and it deserves every bit of that recognition. Honor to Us All is the opening number that sets up Mulan's world and her family's expectations for her. She needs to bring honor to the family by being a good wife, essentially. It's a lively, colorful song that also functions as sharp social commentary, laying out in no uncertain terms what Chinese society of that era expected from women. It's funny and visually spectacular, but there's an undercurrent of sadness to it if you're paying attention, because you can see Mulan trying so hard to meet these expectations and feeling like she's failing at every turn. A Girl Worth Fighting For is the marching song that Yao, Ling, and Qianpo sing as the troops head toward the front lines. Each soldier describes his ideal woman, and Mulan, as Ping, accidentally suggests that intelligence and a good conversation might be desirable qualities, which earns her collective bewilderment from her fellow soldiers. The song is a great character piece for the three soldiers, and it's also genuinely funny. But the way it ends, abruptly, when the army arrives at a devastated village, is one of the most effective tonal shifts in the film, and it's handled with remarkable grace. And then there's True to Your Heart, a duet between 98 Degrees and Stevie Wonder that plays over the end credits. Look, it's a product of its time in the best way, and if you were a kid in 1998, that song was everywhere, and you loved every second of it. No shame. Jerry Goldsmith's score deserves its own moment of appreciation. Goldsmith incorporated traditional Chinese musical elements, including instrumentation and melodic structures inspired by classical Chinese music, into his orchestral framework, creating something that feels both culturally specific and universally cinematic. The score during the battle sequences is particularly impressive, with driving rhythms and sweeping themes that convey the chaos and stakes of the action. The quieter, more intimate moments, particularly during scenes between Mulan and her father, are scored with tremendous sensitivity. It's one of Goldsmith's finest works, and that is saying something, given his extraordinary career. Now let's talk about the animation itself, because Mulan represents one of the high points of the Disney Renaissance era in terms of visual ambition and technical achievement. The film's animation team drew heavily on traditional Chinese art, particularly ink wash painting, which is characterized by its fluid brushwork, misty atmospheres, and elegant minimalism. Many sequences in the film, particularly the early scenes set in the Fei family's home and surrounding countryside, have a quality that feels almost like a living painting. The color palette shifts throughout the film to reflect mood and setting. Warm, golden tones in domestic scenes, cooler blues and grays in the military encampment, and stark, beautiful whites and silvers during the mountain sequences. One of the most technically impressive sequences in the film is the Avalanche scene, in which Mulan uses a cannon to trigger a massive snowslide that buries Shan Yu's army. This sequence involved sophisticated computer animation to render the movement of enormous quantities of snow, and it remains visually stunning even by today's standards. The combination of hand-drawn characters and environments with CGI effects is handled seamlessly. You're not pulled out of the world by the transition, which is a testament to the skill of the visual effects team. The design of the characters themselves reflects a deliberate aesthetic choice to draw on Chinese artistic traditions while still making the characters expressive and readable in the Disney style. The characters are slightly simplified compared to some other Disney films of the era, with cleaner lines and less detailed shading, which gives the film a visual quality that feels appropriately connected to its cultural roots. Shan Yu, in contrast, is rendered in much more dramatic and shadowed tones, making him visually distinct from the other characters and reinforcing his threatening nature. Background design is another area where Mulan truly shines. The landscapes, the mountains, the valleys, the snow-covered passes, the imperial city, are breathtaking. The research trip to China clearly paid enormous dividends in this regard because the environments feel genuinely rooted in a specific place and culture. The Great Wall sequence in particular is a visual set piece that combines architectural grandeur with dramatic scale in a way that leaves a lasting impression. Let's circle back to some of the story's key sequences, because there are so many memorable moments in this film that we could spend all day talking about them. One of the early highlights is the matchmaker scene, in which Mulan is taken to meet the matchmaker, a severe, imperious woman who is responsible for arranging suitable marriages for the village's young women. The sequence is pure physical comedy. Cricky the cricket gets loose, ink gets spilled everywhere, tea gets dumped in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the matchmaker ends up on fire. It's chaotic and hilarious, but it also establishes Mulan's character perfectly. She's trying her absolute best. She's not trying to cause trouble, but somehow trouble finds her anyway. The matchmaker's final pronouncement, "You may look like a bride, but you will never bring your family honor," is harsh, and it lands with real weight, which makes Mulan's decision to take her father's place feel even more understandable. The training sequence is one of the film's most extended set pieces, and it's enormously entertaining. Mulan arrives at the training camp and immediately has to figure out how to exist convincingly as a man. She doesn't know how the other soldiers talk to each other. She's not as physically strong as her fellow recruits, and she has to be constantly vigilant about maintaining her disguise. The early training scenes show her struggling alongside everyone else. She's not magically competent, which is important. What she is smart and observant, and she figures out clever solutions to problems that brute strength alone can't solve. The moment when she climbs the tall wooden pole by using 2 weighted rings as leverage is one of the most satisfying moments in the film. It's clever, it's earned, and Shang's expression when he sees her do it is priceless. The mountain battle sequence is where the film fully commits to its action-adventure identity, and it's spectacular. Mulan's plan to trigger the avalanche is the kind of quick thinking that defines her as a hero. She doesn't beat the enemy through direct confrontation. She outsmarts them. And the aftermath, when she's revealed to be a woman and effectively cast out of the army, is genuinely heartbreaking. She's just saved everyone, and instead of being celebrated, she's left alone in the snow. It's a devastating moment, but it sets up the film's final act perfectly. Because here's the thing about Mulan's structure that makes it so effective. The climax of the film isn't really the avalanche or the mountain battle. The real climax is Mulan's return to the imperial city, when she has to convince people who have already dismissed and rejected her that Shan Yu is still alive and planning to attack the emperor. Nobody believes her. The guards won't listen. Her fellow soldiers at first walk past her, and she has to find a way to make herself heard. That's the emotional and thematic heart of the movie. Not the physical battle, but the struggle to be believed and taken seriously. And when Yao, Ling, and Qianpo stop and turn around and dress up as concubines to help her infiltrate the palace, it's one of the most genuinely joyful moments in the film. The final confrontation with Shan Yu in the Emperor's palace is exciting and well choreographed, and it culminates in Mulan using her wits once again rather than pure combat skills to defeat the villain. She uses fireworks, another clever, resourceful solution, and the visual spectacle of the finale is appropriately grand. And then there's the ending, which is one of the most emotionally satisfying conclusions in all of Disney animation. Mulan returns home to her father, not with a husband, which was the original goal of her story arc in conventional terms, but with the sword of Shan Yu and a pendant from the Emperor. Her father's response is to set aside these symbols of honor and glory, look at his daughter and say, "My greatest gift and honor is having you for a daughter." That's it. That's the whole movie, right there in one line. It's perfect. And then, of course, Shang shows up at the Fa family's home, ostensibly to return Mulan's helmet, but obviously because he couldn't stop thinking about her. Grandmother Fa's response, "Would you like to stay for dinner? Would you like to stay forever?" is absolutely iconic. And it's the kind of joke that lands on every single viewing. The film ends on a note of warm, earned optimism, with Mulan having claimed her place in the world on her own terms. Now, let's talk about the cultural context of the film and the conversation around its representation, because it's an important part of understanding how Mulan has been received and discussed over the years. Disney made a genuine effort to research and represent Chinese culture authentically. The China trip, the consultation with cultural experts, the use of traditional visual art styles, the incorporation of the actual historical legend, and in many ways, those efforts show. The film captures something real and meaningful about Chinese values like filial piety, honor, and the tension between individual desire and family duty. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that Mulan is still a product made by a predominantly Western studio for a global audience, and some of its choices reflect that reality. The film Americanizes certain aspects of the story in ways that make it more accessible to Western viewers but may feel less authentic to Chinese audiences. The character of Mushu, for instance, while beloved by many, was met with some criticism from Chinese viewers and cultural commentators who felt that a comic relief dragon didn't adequately represent the cultural significance of dragons in Chinese tradition, where they are revered symbols rather than comedic sidekicks. These are valid conversations to have, and they don't diminish the film's achievements. They add complexity to our understanding of it. Mulan was genuinely groundbreaking in many ways. It was the first Disney animated feature to center a Chinese protagonist. It drew on a non-Western cultural tradition in a serious and sustained way, and it offered young viewers, particularly young girls, a hero who was defined by intelligence and courage rather than beauty and passivity. The film's influence on the generation that grew up with it is enormous and lasting. The voice cast is also worth spending more time on, because it's genuinely remarkable. Ming-Na Wen has spoken in interviews about what it meant to her to voice Mulan. As a Chinese-American actress, being cast in the role of one of Disney's first prominent Asian protagonists was enormously significant, both personally and professionally. She has said that she felt a responsibility to honor both the character and the cultural legacy behind her, and that commitment comes through in every line reading. Her performance is warm and grounded and funny, and it gives Mulan a sense of genuine personality that goes beyond the archetype of brave girl who breaks the rules. B.D. Wong's performance as Shang is similarly impressive. He brings a real seriousness and earnestness to the character that prevents him from becoming a generic love interest. Shang is his own fully realized character, dealing with his own pressures and fears, and the voice performance reflects. The same can be said for Soon-Tek-Oh as Fa Zhou. Every scene between Mulan and her father carries genuine emotional weight, and Oh's performance is a big part of why. The supporting voice cast includes some genuinely delightful choices. Pat Morita, known to most audiences as Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, voices the Emperor, and he brings a dignity and warmth to the role that makes the Emperor feel genuinely wise and benevolent. George Takei and James Hong round out the supporting cast, adding further depth and star power to the ensemble. Now let's talk about the film's themes in a bit more depth, because Mulan is a richer and more thematically complex film than it sometimes gets credit for. At its surface level, it's an adventure story about a girl who goes to war and saves China. But underneath that, it's a story about identity, about the gap between who you are and who the world expects you to be, and the courage it takes to close that gap. Every major character in the film is dealing with some version of this conflict. Mulan is trying to figure out who she is outside of the role her society has assigned her. Shang is trying to live up to his father's legacy while also forging his own path. Fa Zhou is trying to maintain his honor and dignity while also coming to terms with his own limitations. Even Mushu is on a journey of identity. He's been stripped of his role as a family guardian and is desperate to prove that he's still valuable and worthy. The film also has a lot to say about the nature of honor and what it actually means. The concept of honor is invoked constantly throughout the story. Honor to the family, honor to the army, honor to China. But the film gradually reveals that conventional honor, the kind that comes from following rules, meeting expectations, and performing one's assigned role, is hollow compared to genuine moral courage. The most honorable thing Mulan does is not fighting in the war. It's fighting for what she believes is right, even when everyone around her tells her she has no place doing so. There's also a surprisingly nuanced treatment of gender in the film, especially given that it was made in 1998 for a family audience. The film doesn't pretend that the gender dynamics of ancient China were fair or sensible. It depicts them clearly and critically, showing how limiting and sometimes cruel those expectations could be. But it also doesn't pretend that dismantling those expectations is easy or costless. Mulan succeeds in the end, but she does so in a specific context where her value can be demonstrated through actions that even the most skeptical observers have to acknowledge. The film is honest about the fact that changing deeply held social beliefs takes more than just one person being brave. The relationship between Mulan and Shang is worth examining in some detail, because it's one of the more unusual romances in the Disney catalog. For most of the film, Shang knows Mulan only as Ping, a male soldier under his command. The film is notably careful not to lean into any explicit jokes at Shang's expense about his apparent attraction to Ping, which would have been easy and lazy comedy. Instead, the film treats the developing respect and affection between them as genuine. And when the truth is revealed, Shang's response, hurt and confusion, feels real and understandable. By the time he shows up at the Fa family home at the end of the film, he's had time to process everything. and his choice to seek Mulan out is presented as a meaningful decision rather than a throwaway romantic resolution. Let's also talk about the film's pacing, which is one of its genuine strengths. At approximately 88 minutes, Mulan moves quickly and doesn't waste time. The first act, establishing Mulan's world, her family, her relationship with her father, and the circumstances that lead to her decision, is efficiently told without feeling rushed. The second act, training, friendship, the developing dynamic with Shang and her fellow soldiers, the march toward battle, is where the film really lives, and it's enormously entertaining. And the third act, the revelation, the rejection, the return, the final battle, the resolution, is emotionally satisfying and dramatically effective. The film knows when to slow down for emotional resonance. The quiet scene between Mulan and her father at the family shrine, for instance, or the aftermath of the mountain battle, and when to keep the momentum going. This kind of structural discipline is harder to achieve than it looks, and it's one of the reasons the film holds up so well even after repeated viewings. One aspect of the film that doesn't always get discussed is its humor, which is genuinely funny rather than just cute. Mushu's comedy is the most obvious example, but the film is full of smaller jokes and visual gags that reward attentive viewing. The soldiers' various misadventures in the training camp, the grandmother Fa's running commentary throughout the film, the sheer absurdity of the palace infiltration sequence, all of it works because it's grounded in character rather than just being random silliness. Even Crikey the Cricket gets genuine laughs through pure physical comedy and timing. The film's action sequences also hold up remarkably well. The Avalanche scene, as mentioned, is visually spectacular, but the rooftop confrontation at the climax is also impressively choreographed and animated. Mulan's movements in that sequence are different from the combat we've seen in the rest of the film. She's improvising, using her environment, thinking on her feet, and the animation reflects that distinction. It's not just exciting to watch, it communicates something about her character through movement. Let's also take a moment to appreciate the world building in Mulan, because the film creates a convincing and visually distinctive version of ancient China without ever feeling like a history lesson. The imperial city is magnificent, vast and ornate, and clearly the product of enormous architectural and cultural research. The training camp has a specific texture and feeling, utilitarian, harsh, but with its own social world beginning to develop. The Fei family home is warm and particular. You can imagine the generations of family history contained in every room. These environments feel lived in and real, which makes the story that unfolds within them feel more grounded. Now, one thing that often surprises people who revisit Mulan as adults is just how emotionally effective the film is, even when you already know exactly what's going to happen. That's the mark of a genuinely well-crafted story. It doesn't rely on surprise for its emotional impact. You know Mulan is going to save her father. You know she's going to prove herself. You know she's going to come home in triumph. But the way the film gets you from beginning to end still moves you every time. The scene where Fa Zhou looks at his daughter and tells her she's his greatest gift is still going to get a reaction on your 15th viewing. That's not an accident. It's skill. The film was released on June 5, 1998, and was a significant commercial success, earning approximately $304 million worldwide against a production budget of approximately $90 million. It was the fifth highest-grossing film of 1998 and Disney's second highest-grossing film of the year. More importantly, it was critically well received, with particular praise for its animation, music, and the character of Mulan herself. The film earned 2 Annie Award nominations and a Golden Globe nomination for Best Motion Picture in the musical or comedy category. In terms of its legacy, Mulan occupies a fascinating position in the Disney canon. It was released during the later part of the Disney Renaissance, the creative golden period that began with The Little Mermaid in 1989, and it represents one of the most ambitious and successful attempts during that era to expand beyond the European fairy tale material that had defined Disney's earlier years. It proved that Disney could tell stories rooted in non-Western traditions and find universal resonance in them, which opened the door for subsequent films like The Emperor's New Groove, Lilo and Stitch, and eventually Moana and Coco. For Chinese-American audiences in particular, Mulan was a watershed moment, the first time many of them had seen their cultural heritage reflected in a Disney animated feature. Ming-Na Wen has spoken about the letters and messages she received from fans, particularly young girls, who told her that Mulan had meant the world to them growing up. That kind of impact goes beyond box office numbers and critical scores. It's the measure of a film that genuinely touched people in a meaningful way. The 1998 film also spawned a direct-to-video sequel, Mulan 2, released in 2004, which was produced without the involvement of most of the original creative team and was received much less warmly. It's one of those sequels that doesn't need to be discussed at length. The original film is complete and self-contained, and the sequel adds nothing essential. We'll leave it. Then, of course, there's the 2020 live-action remake, which is a completely different beast and warrants its own extended discussion, but for now we'll just say that it made very different choices from the original and met with a very mixed response. And leave it at that, because today we're here for the 1998 animated masterpiece. It's also worth reflecting on how Mulan fits into the broader conversation about Disney's female protagonists and how that conversation has evolved over the decades. In 1989, Ariel in The Little Mermaid was criticized by some for giving up her voice and her world for a man. In 1991, Belle in Beauty and the Beast was criticized for seemingly falling in love with her captor. In 1992, Jasmine in Aladdin, while spirited and independent, was still largely defined by the romantic plot. Mulan is different. Her story is not primarily about romance. She's not on a journey to find love. She's on a journey to protect her father and discover her own world. The romantic element with Shang is genuine and touching, but it's secondary to her main arc. In this sense, Mulan anticipated the direction that Disney's female-led stories would take in the decades after, toward heroines like Tiana, Rapunzel, Merida, Moana, and Raya, who are all defined by their own goals and journeys rather than by their relationships with male characters. Mulan also influenced storytelling and animation beyond Disney. You can trace her influence in countless animated films and series that feature strong, intelligent female protagonists who use cleverness and determination rather than conventional power to achieve their goals. She became an archetype in her own right. Let's revisit the music one more time, because there are a few things we haven't covered yet. The process of creating the songs for Mulan was, by all accounts, incredibly challenging. The songwriting team went through many drafts and many rejected songs before landing on the lineup we know today. Matthew Wilder and David Zippel have spoken about the pressure of following in the footsteps of the legendary songwriting teams that had defined the earlier Disney Renaissance films, Alan Menken and Howard Ashman for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, Elton John and Tim Rice for The Lion King. But they found their own voice and created something that feels unique to Mulan while still fitting within the Disney musical tradition. Reflection, in particular, was a song that went through significant development. The melody and emotional core of the song were there from early on, but finding the right words, the right way to articulate Mulan's internal conflict without being heavy-handed or generic, took considerable effort. The final version of the song is elegantly written, with lyrics that feel specific to Mulan's situation, while also being universal enough that anyone who has ever felt out of place can connect with them. It's one of those songs that feels inevitable in retrospect, like it could only ever have been written this way. But that's the mark of really good songwriting. The orchestration throughout the film deserves mention too. Jerry Goldsmith's score incorporates the erhu, a two-stringed Chinese fiddle, the dizi, a Chinese transverse flute, and various percussion instruments from Chinese musical traditions, alongside the full Western orchestra. The result is a sonic world that feels distinctive and emotionally rich, neither purely Western nor purely Chinese, but something that bridges the two traditions in a way that serves the story. The theme associated with Mulan's family, heard during the shrine scene and Fa Zhou's emotional farewell, is particularly beautiful, and it recurs throughout the score in ways that reward careful listening. One more thing worth noting about the film's production is the extraordinary level of detail that went into the background art. Disney legend Rick Slider served as background supervisor, and the team he led created environments that are both visually stunning and thematically coherent. The color choices in each scene are deliberate and meaningful. Warmer colors when Mulan is at home with her family, cooler and starker colors during the military sequences, a shift to warmer tones again as Mulan begins to find her footing among the soldiers. This kind of visual storytelling, where color and light communicate emotional information before a single word is spoken, is one of the things that separates great animation from good animation, and Mulan consistently achieves greatness. The character of Shan Yu also benefits from outstanding design and animation. His physical presence, massive shoulders, gray skin, yellow eyes, makes him visually striking in every frame he appears in. The animators working on Shan Yu clearly studied large predatory animals, big cats, wolves, to inform his movement, which gives him an unsettling, prowling quality even when he's standing still. He's not cartoonishly evil, he's genuinely threatening, which is exactly what the story needs. Let's also talk about some of the film's quieter moments, because they're easy to overlook in the excitement of the bigger set pieces. The scene at the family shrine, when Mulan speaks to the portraits of her ancestors before taking her father's conscription notice, is one of the most beautifully written and animated scenes in the film. She's talking to people who can't talk back, in a space that is simultaneously intimate and ancient, and she's making a decision that she knows could change everything. The animation in this scene is restrained and precise. No big gestures, no dramatic lighting, just a young woman in a quiet room making an enormous choice. It's genuinely moving. Similarly, the scene in the training camp at night, when Mulan is sitting apart from the other soldiers and reflecting on the day, has a quiet beauty to it. The other soldiers are asleep, the camp is still, and she's alone with her thoughts. These moments of interiority are important in an animated film. They remind us that the protagonist has an inner life, not just external challenges to overcome, and they make us care about her all the more. The film's treatment of Mulan's relationship with her fellow soldiers is also worth appreciating. Yao, Ling, and Qianpo begin as antagonists of a sort. They're dismissive of Ping and not particularly interested in making friends. But through shared hardship and the genuine warmth of Mulan's personality, even in disguise, they become genuine friends. The bonding moments between the four of them are some of the film's most entertaining and the eventual revelation of Mulan's identity is handled with real grace on the part of these characters. Their immediate willingness to follow her, disguise themselves as concubines, and storm the palace shows that the bonds they've formed are real and unconditional. That's friendship, right there. And then there's the relationship between Mulan and Mushu, which is the film's primary emotional through line beneath the main plot. They're both outcasts, both desperate to prove themselves, both carrying a sense of shame that they're trying to overcome. Mushu's self-serving motives at the start of the film, he's helping Mulan partly because he sees her mission as his own shot at redemption, gradually give way to genuine care and concern. By the end of the film, his joy at her success is completely sincere, and the scene where he's restored to his position as a family guardian is satisfying precisely because we've watched him earn it. He started as a fraud, trying to fake his way back to respectability, and he ended up genuinely helping save China. Not bad for a lizard. In closing, or rather, in continuing, because we've barely scratched the surface, Mulan is a film that rewards analysis and rewards rewatching. There's always something new to notice, whether it's a detail in the background art, a subtlety in a voice performance, a musical reference that you missed the first time, or a thematic connection that becomes clearer with age and experience. It's a film that was made with enormous care and skill by a team of people who clearly believed in what they were creating, and that belief comes through in every frame. So the next time you feel like watching something that will entertain you, move you, make you laugh, and leave you feeling genuinely uplifted, and let's be honest, that's what we all need sometimes, put on Mulan. It holds up. It more than holds up. It's one of the great animated films ever made, and it deserves every bit of love it continues to receive more than 25 years after its release. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a sudden overwhelming urge to listen to "I'll Make a Man Out of You" for the rest of the afternoon, and I have absolutely no regrets about that. Let's keep going, because there are aspects of this film we genuinely haven't explored yet, and they're well worth your time. For instance, we haven't talked in depth about the film's historical context, where it sits within the broader arc of Disney's development as a studio, and what it meant for the trajectory of animated filmmaking in the late 1990s. By 1998, the Disney Renaissance was entering its twilight years. The period had begun with spectacular commercial and critical success. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, and had continued with films that were successful, but perhaps a step below those early peaks. Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules. There was a genuine sense within the industry that Disney was looking for its next direction, its next creative breakthrough. Mulan arrived as something of a course correction, a return to strong storytelling and character, grounded in genuine cultural research and propelled by a protagonist whose appeal was both specific and universal. The film was followed by Tarzan in 1999, which was the final major success of the Renaissance era and marked the end of a remarkable 10-year run. Looking back, Mulan stands as one of the finest achievements of that period, not the flashiest or the most technically dazzling, but one of the most coherent and emotionally satisfying. If The Lion King was Disney at its most epic, and Aladdin was Disney at its most entertaining, then Mulan was Disney at its most genuinely progressive, willing to challenge its own conventions and tell a story that didn't fit neatly into the princess template. The film was also notable for what it didn't do. It didn't give Mulan a makeover that turned her into a conventional beauty. It didn't have her rescued at the climactic moment by the male lead. It didn't resolve her story by having her marry the prince and live happily ever after as a traditional wife. These might seem like small things in 2024, but in 1998 they represented meaningful choices that distinguished Mulan from many of its predecessors. The film's marketing campaign was also significant. Disney promoted Mulan as an adventure film rather than a fairy tale, which was a deliberate strategy to broaden its appeal beyond the typical animated princess film audience. The promotional materials emphasized action, adventure, and Mulan's warrior aspect, and the film was positioned as something that boys as well as girls would enjoy. This was actually a smart and reasonably successful approach. Mulan has always had a broad fan base that cuts across gender lines in a way that some of the more traditionally feminine Disney films of the era don't. There's also an interesting conversation to be had about Mulan's status within the Disney Princess franchise. She was officially inducted into the Disney Princess lineup, even though she's not actually a princess by birth or marriage. She doesn't have royal blood, and she doesn't marry a prince. She's a soldier who saves an emperor. Her inclusion in the princess lineup has sometimes been cited as evidence that princess in the Disney brand sense means something broader than the traditional definition. It's about a certain kind of story and a certain kind of protagonist, rather than literal royal status. This debate is ultimately somewhat academic, but it's interesting as a reflection of how Disney itself thinks about what Mulan represents. Speaking of representation, we should acknowledge that Mulan was one of a very small number of mainstream animated films in the 1990s to feature Asian characters and Asian cultural traditions in a central, non-stereotypical way. The landscape of animated representation has changed significantly since then, but it's worth remembering how unusual Mulan was in its moment. For many viewers, particularly Asian American viewers, it was the first time they'd seen themselves reflected in a Disney film, and that experience of recognition and validation should not be underestimated. Ming-Na Wen has spoken about this aspect of the film's legacy with tremendous warmth and pride. She's mentioned receiving messages from young women who grew up wanting to be Mulan, not because she was a princess or because she was beautiful, but because she was brave and clever and refused to give up. That kind of impact is hard to quantify, but it's real and lasting. The character of Mulan has meant something profound to generations of viewers, and that meaning continues to grow and deepen as new generations discover the film. It's also worth noting that the film has been the subject of substantial academic discussion in fields including film studies, cultural studies, gender studies, and East Asian studies. Scholars have examined the film from every angle: its representation of Chinese culture, its treatment of gender and identity, its relationship to the original Hua Mulan legend, its place within Disney's commercial and artistic development, and its reception by different audience communities around the world. The fact that a Disney animated film has generated this level of scholarly attention is itself a testament to its richness and complexity. And on a slightly more personal note, because these video essays work best when they're honest, Mulan is one of those films that many people in a certain generation can point to as genuinely formative. Not just entertaining, not just enjoyable, but actually important to their sense of self. The idea that you don't have to fit the mold you've been handed, that you can find your own definition of honor and worth, that love and bravery and intelligence are things worth fighting for. These are not small ideas, and the film communicates them with grace and power. There's a reason Reflection is still the song that gets cited by so many people when they talk about the Disney songs that meant the most to them growing up. It's not the most catchy or the most technically impressive Disney song. That honor probably belongs to something from Beauty and the Beast or The Lion King. But it's one of the most emotionally honest, and that honesty reaches people in a way that pure craftsmanship alone can't. Let's finish where we began. with the basic premise of Mulan. A young woman who doesn't fit her society's expectations for her takes an enormous risk to protect her father and ends up saving China in the process. It's a story that's been told for over 1,000 years in various forms because it speaks to something fundamental about the human experience. The desire to be seen for who you truly are, the struggle to reconcile duty and identity, the courage it takes to step outside the boundaries that have been drawn around you. Disney's 1998 film doesn't just tell that story well, it tells it beautifully. With music that lifts your spirit and breaks your heart in equal measure. With animation that combines technical mastery and cultural sensitivity in ways that feel effortless even though they clearly weren't. With characters who feel real and specific and worth caring about. With humor that is genuinely funny rather than forced. With a narrative that trusts its audience, even its youngest audience members, to understand and appreciate its themes without having them spelled out in capital letters. Mulan is not a perfect film. No film is. But it is a genuinely great one. And 26 years after it first graced cinema screens around the world, it remains as vital and moving and entertaining as it was on day one. If you love it already, this has hopefully given you some new things to think about and appreciate. If you're watching it for the first time based on this video, then you're in for a treat. And if you're somewhere in the middle, someone who remembers it fondly but hasn't revisited it in years, then consider this your official invitation to go back. You'll be glad you did. Thanks for spending this time with me talking about one of my absolute favorite animated films. There's plenty more to discuss on this channel. Drop a comment letting me know what you'd like to see next, and I'll see you in the next one. Actually, you know what? Before we wrap this up completely, there are still a few things I want to make sure we cover, because I'd feel genuinely bad leaving them out. We've talked about the big stuff, the story, the characters, the music, the animation, but there are some smaller details and deeper layers of this film that don't always make it into the conversation, and they absolutely deserve their moment in the spotlight. Let's start with something that I think a lot of people overlook on their first few viewings: the way the film handles failure. Mulan fails. A lot. And not in a cute, endearing, "oops, I knocked over the flower vase" kind of way. She fails in ways that have real consequences. The matchmaker scene ends with her being publicly humiliated and told she'll never bring honor to her family. Her early attempts at military training are genuinely rough. She's not naturally gifted at combat, and it shows. Her first major contribution to the war effort accidentally leads to a situation where she's exposed and cast out. These are significant failures, and the film doesn't gloss over them or rush past them. It sits with them for a moment and lets you feel what Mulan feels. This is actually pretty rare in animated films, even good ones. There's a tendency in family entertainment to soften failure, to make it temporary and consequence-free, something that gets resolved in the next scene with a pep talk and a musical number. Mulan doesn't do that. The consequences of her choices feel real, and that's why her eventual success feels earned rather than inevitable. You've watched her struggle and fail and get back up over and over again, and by the time she's standing on that palace rooftop using her brain to outmaneuver someone twice her size, you're completely invested. You've taken the journey with her, and the payoff reflects that. This also connects to something important about the way the film portrays intelligence as a form of strength. In a lot of action-oriented stories, animated or otherwise, the ultimate measure of a hero is physical power. The hero punches or fights or uses raw strength to overcome the final obstacle. Mulan consistently refuses this framework. Her key moments of triumph are all won through cleverness, using the weights to climb the pole, triggering the Avalanche with a single cannon, using fireworks in the palace confrontation. She's not the strongest person in any room she enters, but she's frequently the smartest, and the film celebrates that without apology. For kids watching, especially kids who aren't naturally athletic or physically imposing, that's an incredibly powerful message. Your brain is a weapon. Use it. Now let's talk about something that I find endlessly fascinating: the way different characters in Mulan relate to the concept of identity and performance. Because when you really look at it, almost every character in this film is performing some version of themselves for someone else's benefit. Mulan is the most obvious example. She's literally performing a completely different gender and identity for the entire second act of the film. But think about Shang. He's performing the role of the tough, emotionally contained military commander because that's what's expected of the son of General Li. In the scene where he receives news about his father's battalion, you can see the crack in that performance, the grief he's trying to suppress, the weight he's carrying beneath the disciplined exterior. He's not naturally cold and hard. He's chosen to present himself that way because he believes it's what leadership requires. Fa Zhou performs the role of the healthy, capable patriarch when the conscription notice arrives, standing up and accepting his duty even though everyone present can see the cost of that performance. The ancestors in the spirit world perform their authority and dignity while clearly being completely unable to agree on anything or make effective decisions. Even Mushu performs the role of a mighty guardian dragon while being, by his own admission, essentially a lizard. The film is full of characters wearing masks, and Mulan's story is, at its deepest level, about what happens when the masks come off. What makes this thematically rich rather than just clever is that the film doesn't suggest that all performance is bad or all masks should be abandoned. Some performances are acts of love. Fa Zhou accepting his conscription notice is a performance of fatherly strength for Mulan's benefit. Some performances are necessary. Mulan disguising herself as Ping is the only way she can accomplish what she needs to accomplish. The film is more nuanced than just be yourself and everything will work. It acknowledges that social identity is complicated, that sometimes the roles we play serve real purposes, and that the goal isn't to eliminate all performance, but to make sure that somewhere underneath all the masks, you still know who you actually are. That's a remarkably sophisticated message for a film aimed primarily at children. And speaking of sophistication, let's talk about the film's treatment of the ancestors, which is one of its most distinctly Chinese cultural elements and also one of its most interesting sources of comedy. The Fei family ancestors exist as a council of spirits who watch over the living members of the family and intervene, in theory anyway, when help is needed. In practice, they spend most of their screen time arguing with each other and making questionable decisions. Sending Mushu is presented as a disaster. He was supposed to be a backup option, and even as a backup option, he's clearly not the most inspiring choice. But here's the thing. The way the film portrays the ancestors is actually quite touching when you look past the comedy. They genuinely care about the family. They're invested in Mulan's well-being even when they're panicking about the decisions they've made. Their concern is real, even if their competence is debatable. And the detail that they can watch the living but can't always effectively help them, that there's a gap between care and capacity, is actually quite profound. It's a gentle, respectful engagement with the concept of ancestral veneration that manages to be both funny and sincere at the same time. Not easy to pull off, but the film does it. The great stone dragon, the family's primary guardian whose awakening Mushu accidentally prevents, is another interesting detail. The stone dragon's absence, The fact that the proper guardian never actually shows up creates the space for Mushu to step in, and there's something almost parable-like about that. Sometimes the grand, imposing official solution fails to materialize, and what saves the day is the small, overlooked, allegedly inadequate option that nobody thought to take seriously. Mushu as the unexpected hero. Mulan as the unexpected soldier. The film is full of this pattern, and it's deeply satisfying every single time it plays out. Let's also spend a moment appreciating the physical comedy in this film, because it really is exceptional. The training camp sequences are full of brilliantly choreographed slapstick, Yao's nose getting bent, the chaos of the first sparring session, the general disaster of the initial training exercises. But the physical comedy never feels random or disconnected from character. When Qianpo picks up both Yao and Ling and holds them at arm's length to stop a fight, that moment is funny because of who Qianpo is, his gentleness, his size, the mild exasperation on his face. When Mushu gets launched across the camp, it's funny because of the gap between his enormous self-regard and his actual physical size. Good physical comedy is character comedy, and Mulan understands that completely. The scene where Mulan and Shang almost kiss, and then don't, because Mulan panics and Shang pulls back, and they both pretend nothing happened, is a masterclass in animated performance and comedic timing. The awkwardness is palpable. You can practically feel the second-hand embarrassment radiating off the screen. And the fact that it doesn't resolve into a neat romantic moment, but instead into mutual confusion and a very deliberate change of subject, makes it feel more real than most of the actual romantic scenes in other Disney films of the era. Romance is awkward. Disney rarely admits that. Mulan does. Now, something that we should definitely discuss is how the film handles the question of what happens after Mulan's identity is revealed. Because the reveal doesn't happen at the very end of the film, it happens at roughly the two-thirds point, and then there's still a whole act left to play out. This is actually a really interesting structural choice, because it means the film has to do something with the aftermath of the revelation beyond just using it as a shocking twist. Shang's decision not to punish Mulan more severely, he leaves her in the snow, alone, but he doesn't have her arrested or taken back to face harsher consequences, is presented as a significant act of mercy. And Mulan's response to being left behind is not to give up and go home. It's to figure out what to do next. She's just been stripped of her role, her identity, her companions, and her sense of purpose, and she sits in the snow for approximately 30 seconds before she starts paying attention to the problem in front of her. The fact that Shan Yu is still alive and heading toward the Emperor. This is who Mulan is. She doesn't wallow. She processes, and then she acts. The scene that follows, when Mulan rides Khan back toward the imperial city to warn people about Shan Yu, is often overlooked because it's relatively brief, but it's crucial to her character. She has nothing to gain from this. She's already been dismissed. Nobody is going to give her a medal for trying to help people who've just rejected her. She does it anyway, because it's the right thing to do, and because she can see what needs to be done, and she knows she's capable of doing it. That's heroism. Not the flashy, glory-seeking kind, but the quiet, stubborn, someone has to do something, and apparently that someone is me kind. And when she arrives in the city and starts trying to convince people that the threat is real, and they don't believe her, not at first, the film resists the temptation to have one person immediately say, "Wait, I'll hear her out." She has to work for it. She has to convince Shang by pointing out details that nobody else noticed, by demonstrating that she knows things that she could only know if she'd been where she said she'd been. She has to earn the second chance, and the fact that she earns it through evidence rather than just emotional appeal makes it feel completely credible. One thing that's easy to miss in all the excitement of the final act is the moment when the Emperor of China bows to Mulan. This is not a throwaway gesture. In the context of the film's world, ancient China, where the emperor is the son of heaven, the supreme authority, the person before whom everyone else bows, the emperor choosing to bow to a young woman from a not particularly distinguished family is genuinely revolutionary. It's the most powerful person in the world acknowledging, publicly and formally, that this person has earned a respect that transcends all the social categories that were supposed to define her limit. The fact that the people of the imperial city immediately follow the emperor's lead and bow as well makes the moment even more powerful. It's not just private acknowledgement, it's public, collective recognition. And then Chi Fu, the snobbish imperial advisor who has been dismissive of Mulan at every turn, visibly struggles with whether to bow. And he does bow, eventually, looking deeply uncomfortable about the whole thing. That detail is perfect. Social change is rarely unanimous and comfortable. There's always someone who goes along with it reluctantly, someone who needs a moment to catch up. Chi Fu bowing is funny and satisfying in equal measure, and it's the kind of specific, character-grounded detail that elevates the film above the level of simple allegory. Let's also give some credit to the film's villain for a moment, because Shan Yu's presence throughout the story is more carefully constructed than it might initially appear. He appears relatively infrequently. He's not in every other scene like some Disney villains, but every appearance is impactful. His introduction at the Great Wall is immediately threatening, because rather than reacting with alarm to the signal fires that have been lit to warn of his approach, he smiles. He wanted them to light the fires. He's using China's own defenses as a demonstration of his confidence and power. That's a really clever piece of villain characterization. It tells you immediately that this is someone who thinks several steps ahead. His tracking of Mulan through the snow after the avalanche is another good example. He emerges from the snow, which should by all rights have stopped him, pulls Mulan's hair ribbon from the snow, and his face shifts from fury to cold calculation. He's adapting, he's focusing, he's choosing a new target. The shift from rage to controlled purpose is more menacing than pure anger would be, and Miguel Ferrer's voice performance captures it perfectly. By the time Shan Yu is climbing the palace walls in the final act, you believe completely that he's capable of anything he's decided to do. The confrontation on the palace roof between Shan Yu and Mulan, once he realizes that the soldier who defeated him was actually her, is one of the film's most charged moments. "You took away my victory," he says, and the fury in his voice is completely personal. It's not just that she's an obstacle, she's an affront. The idea that the person who defeated him was a woman is, to him, unbearable. And Mulan's response, calmly using his rage against him, staying focused and resourceful while he's letting his anger control him, is the final demonstration of everything the film has been saying about intelligence, composure, and what real strength looks like. Now let's zoom out for a moment and think about what it means to watch Mulan in 2024, because context matters, and the film hits differently depending on when and where you're experiencing it. For people who saw it as children in 1998, it's a piece of personal history, deeply tied to specific memories, specific feelings, a specific version of themselves. For young people discovering it now, it's a classic that exists within a much richer and more diverse landscape of animated storytelling than it did when it first came out. And for adults revisiting it after a long absence, it often turns out to be better than they remembered, which is not always the case with beloved childhood films. The thing about Mulan that makes it hold up so well is that its core concerns are not dated. The tension between individual identity and social expectation is not a 1990s problem. It's a permanent feature of human experience. The desire to be seen and valued for who you actually are rather than what role you've been assigned is not culturally specific. It's universal. The idea that cleverness and determination can achieve things that raw power cannot is a message that resonates regardless of when you're hearing it. These are themes that don't expire, and that's why the film continues to find new audiences and connect with them in meaningful ways. There's also something to be said about the way Mulan portrays family, not as an obstacle to individual fulfillment, which is a common narrative shortcut, but as a genuine source of love and strength that is also, sometimes, a source of pressure and misunderstanding. The Fa family genuinely loves Mulan. They're not villains or antagonists. They want good things for her. But the things they want for her are shaped by a specific cultural context that doesn't quite fit the person she actually is. And rather than rejecting her family in order to find herself, Mulan finds herself in a way that ultimately brings her closer to her family. Her father doesn't choose between his pride in Mulan as a conventional daughter and his love for Mulan as she actually is. He realizes that the latter was always worth more than the former. That's a meaningful and hopeful resolution, and it rings true in a way that many more dramatic father-daughter conflict resolutions don't. Grandmother Fa deserves one more extended moment of appreciation, because she is genuinely one of the most perfect supporting characters in the Disney canon. She exists somewhat outside the normal rules of the film's world. She says outrageous things. She ignores social conventions. She gets away with behavior that would be unacceptable from anyone else, but in a way that never feels like she's breaking the film's internal logic. She's an old woman who has seen enough of the world to know which rules are worth following and which ones aren't, and she's decided to live accordingly. The cricket she gives Mulan as a lucky gift is based on the fact that she was nearsighted and couldn't see that it was a plain cricket rather than a special one, which is both funny and weirdly touching. Grandmother Fa gives Mulan luck anyway. It just turns out the luck was already there. And Crikey the cricket is, by the way, one of the most effective small animal companions in Disney history, which is saying something in a studio that has given us Jiminy Cricket, Timothy Mouse, Sebastian the Crab, and Flounder. Crikey doesn't speak, doesn't have the kind of comedic voice performance that defines most Disney animal sidekicks, and yet his reactions and expressions are consistently funny and endearing. The animators give him a surprisingly broad range of emotional responses for a tiny cricket, and the running gag of whether he's actually lucky or not pays off beautifully throughout the film. Speaking of small details that reward attention, the film is full of moments where the background characters react to events in ways that add texture and humor without pulling focus from the main action. When the matchmaker ends up on fire, the reactions of the other women waiting outside are priceless. When Mulan first arrives at the training camp and all the other soldiers stop to stare at her, the variety of expressions is genuinely funny. When the Emperor is carried away to safety by Qian Po during the palace infiltration and offers very serene, dignified commentary on the situation, it's one of the funniest things in the film. These details accumulate into a film that feels incredibly alive, like a world that exists beyond the edges of the frame, populated by people who have their own reactions and their own points of view. Let's take a moment to talk about something that rarely gets mentioned in discussions of Mulan, but that I think is genuinely worth noting: the film's sound design. Beyond the music and the voice performances, the sound design of Mulan is exceptionally well crafted. The sounds of the training camp, the clash of weapons, the grunts of exertion, the ambient noise of a military encampment, ground the film in a physical reality that the animation alone couldn't achieve. The sounds of the mountain battle, the rush of snow, the howling wind, are immersive in a way that draws you into the sequence emotionally as well as visually. And the contrast between the noisy, chaotic world of the military and the quiet, intimate world of the Fay family home is established as much through sound as through image. When Mulan is at home, the soundscape is gentle. Wind in the trees, birds, the creak of the family's old house. When she's at war, it's relentless and overwhelming. Sound as storytelling is an often underappreciated craft, and Mulan uses it brilliantly. The film also uses silence very effectively. The moment after Mulan is revealed, when Shang and the other soldiers stare at her and nobody speaks, is one of the most uncomfortable silences in animated cinema. You feel the weight of it. You feel everything that silence contains: shock, betrayal, confusion, anger, and underneath all of it, a shared history of genuine friendship that nobody quite knows how to reconcile with this new information. That silence does more work than any dialogue could, and the film is confident enough to let it breathe. There's a related moment later, when Mulan is sitting alone in the snow after being left behind, and the camera holds on her for a long moment without cutting away. She's not crying dramatically. She's not making a big speech about her feelings. She's just sitting there, processing, in that particular way that people do when something genuinely devastating has happened, and they haven't quite caught up to it yet. That stillness is real and human and uncommon in animated films, and it makes everything that follows feel more earned. You know what else doesn't get nearly enough credit? The horses in this film. Khan, Mulan's horse, is expressive and characterful in a way that adds genuine texture to the story. He's brave when it matters, he's funny at moments of comic relief, and his loyalty to Mulan is communicated entirely through movement and expression, without a single word. The animators studied horse behavior extensively to make Khan's movements feel authentic, and it shows. When Khan carries Mulan through the training camp or leaps across the gaps in the imperial city, he feels like a real animal with his own personality, not just a plot convenience shaped like a horse. And since we're giving credit where credit is due, let's acknowledge the animators and animation supervisors who brought all of these characters to life. Mark Henn, one of Disney's most celebrated animators, supervised Mulan's animation, and his work on the character is exceptional. He captured the way she moves, sometimes tentative, sometimes bold, always specific to her character, with a kind of precision and intentionality that only the best character animators can achieve. The different way Mulan moves as herself versus the way she moves as Ping is a subtle but important distinction that Henn maintains consistently throughout the film. As Ping, her movements are deliberately constrained. She's trying not to draw attention to herself, trying to occupy space the way she imagines a man would. As herself, she's more natural, more at ease, even if she's also sometimes more uncertain. That's character through movement, and it's masterful. Barry Temple supervised the animation for Li Shang, and his performance captures the contradiction at the heart of that character, the public face of strength and authority, and the private face of doubt and grief. The scene where Shang learns about his father is animated with tremendous restraint and sensitivity, and Temple's work in that scene is some of the finest character animation in the film. The way Shang's face changes, the almost imperceptible collapse of composure quickly reassembled, is heartbreaking in the way that only the most precise animation can be. Tony Bancroft, one of the film's directors, also supervised the animation for Mushu, and the fact that a director was personally animating one of the main characters speaks to how central Mushu was to the creative vision of the film. Bancroft brought an enormous amount of physical specificity to Mushu. Every gesture, every pose, every expression is calibrated to maximize the comedy while also maintaining the character's emotional truth. The fact that Mushu can be simultaneously ridiculous and genuinely lovable is a significant achievement, and it's rooted in the quality and consistency of the animation. We should also talk about the Hun's character design and animation, because it represents a different approach from the rest of the film. The Hun warriors are deliberately designed to be more stylized and angular than the other characters. They're almost caricatures of military menace, broad-shouldered and dark-armored with sharp geometric features. This distinction is partly cultural shorthand. They're meant to read immediately as other, as a threat, but it's also a visual choice that emphasizes their symbolic role in the story. They're not presented as fully rounded individuals with their own complex inner lives. They're the force that Mulan and the army have to overcome, and their visual design reflects that narrative function. Shan Yu himself is the exception within the Huns. He's more complex and specific than his soldiers, more capable of individual expression, and his animation reflects that. He's the Huns given a specific human face, and that face is intelligent and purposeful in a way that makes him genuinely threatening, rather than just physically imposing. There's so much more we could say about the film's color script, about the development of individual sequences, about the specific challenges of animating snow and fire and large crowd scenes, about the way the film's editing rhythms shift between the intimate domestic scenes and the larger military sequences. Animation is one of those art forms where the depth of craft is almost invisible when it's working well. You don't notice the decisions, you just experience the result. But spending time thinking about those decisions deepens your appreciation for what the people who made Mulan actually achieved. And what they achieved, ultimately, is a film that functions simultaneously as entertainment, as cultural document, as thematic argument, and as emotional experience. It works as a kid's movie. There are enough laughs and enough visual excitement to keep younger viewers completely engaged. It works as a family film. There are layers of meaning and humor that adults appreciate differently from children. And it works as serious cinema, as a piece of storytelling craft that rewards sustained attention and genuine critical engagement. That's a rare combination. Most films manage one or two of those things. Mulan manages all of them, and it does so with a lightness of touch that makes the achievement look almost effortless, even though everything we've talked about today proves that it absolutely was not. So yeah, Mulan, 26 years old and still holding up like it was released yesterday. If you haven't revisited it recently, I genuinely hope this conversation has made you want to. And if you've been watching this whole time nodding along because you already knew all of this and you just love talking about Mulan, honestly, same. We're the same person. Welcome. Mulan manages all of them, and it does so with a lightness of touch that makes the achievement look almost effortless, even though everything we've talked about today proves that it absolutely was not. So yeah, Mulan, 26 years old and still holding up like it was released yesterday. If you haven't revisited it recently, I genuinely hope this conversation has made you want to. And if you've been watching this whole time nodding along because you already knew all of this and you just love talking about Mulan, honestly, same. We're the same person. Welcome.